Welcome back to my limited podcast series on the 12 signs of the Zodiac and the construction of the Zodiac wheel. My name is Brie Rhiannon. It's nice to have you all back if you've been watching all of the other episodes. Today, we will be discussing Leo, but as we have been for the entire way through, we are learning about the Zodiac wheel by axis and how you construct it through polarity and applying the laws of physics, quantum mechanics, quantum physics theories, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering principles, to astrology and intangible energy and the Zodiac wheel. This is going to be one of my favorite episodes. I can already tell y'all that. Even when I was writing everything for my website, I actually even got the format when I wrote Leo, and I had to go back to the other houses before that. So this is going to just be a really, really fun episode. I do like to call this the axis of fun, really. It's both Leo and Aquarius when we talk about the whole axis together. Is just they're fun. It's the axis of expression in multiple ways as well. So I do have a background as a second generation astrologer when it comes to my astrology knowledge. My mom is an astrologer, but also I'm applying a lot of scientific principles and engineering principles to astrology and intangible energy, also as a psychic medium, an oracle, energy reader, energy worker, and things like that, because I have spent the last 5 years in my, I guess you could call it like secular world career in something called test and measurement, which is helping engineers be able to quite simply do their jobs. Engineers have to do a lot of testing, whether it's research, product development, product quality, manufacturing, the scaling of manufacturing, you name it. But I had a heavy emphasis in aerospace engineering as well as renewable energy. So this is also an axis when we get to Aquarius, really, especially, that we will dive further into those things. And I also do have one Leo placement personally. I love Leo energy. I'm very drawn to Leo energy myself. I guess technically I have two. I should say I have two Leo placements. I have a 7th house Jupiter Leo placement and also my South Node. My South Node is in Leo. And then my 1st house Aquarius North Node also puts me on this axis as well. So we are learning about astrology through foundational building blocks and the construction of the entire wheel so that we can really break down astrology, even though it is this vast system of knowledge that can feel really, really daunting and intimidating when you're trying to learn it. You feel like you have so much to memorize. Learning things by axis also helps break it down into a more simplified version to help it all really make sense and connect a lot of dots and have a lot of pattern recognition going on in your brain. So that is really what we're doing, where we go through the sign, the house, learning the house first, then you stack your building blocks on top of that with the planetary rulership, the element goes on top of that, then you learn the mode, which is the entire axis is the same mode, and then after that I like to have people look at the symbol afterward, and just in case you forget everything, you can kind of get things just through the imagery of the symbol and where your brain takes you through association, just simply looking at a symbol of imagery that is associated with that sign of the zodiac. Right before I jump in, I will show you guys my outfit. So this is my Leo outfit today. It's a little, I could like put my leg up so you guys can kind of see my yellow pants because of Leo is ruled by the sun. So it is the only sign of the zodiac that is ruled by the sun. So yellow is definitely a color that is associated with Leo, but because this is the sign of the zodiac and the house of self-expression and creativity and the performing arts and things like that, I have on a rainbow shirt with this. And also just like a fun fact about this outfit, I'm really deep and heavy into the rave and festival, EDM, and bass music scene. And so this is one of my very like regular outfits that I will wear to like a rave or a festival setting, which is also a huge community of self-expression and being genuinely and authentically yourself and loving yourself for who you are. And that is just huge, 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 huge in Leo and fifth house energy that we will be talking about today with the spectrum of frequency of definition of assignment for this house and sign of the zodiac and learning everything that it represents. So let's dive in. Okay, so you're building your zodiac wheel, right? You're building it by axis. The last axis that we built was the Cancer Capricorn axis. So that was the 4th house and the 10th house. And also when you're learning about polarity with these signs of the zodiac, that's like a plus and a minus on the battery. And what I'm really doing with that is also deconstructing the usual unintentional biases that come through learning astrology through a very gendered lens. If you haven't been exposed to kind of just like traditional means and lessons of learning astrology, it's very, very common to get taught that like all fire signs and all air signs are masculine, or all earth signs and all water signs are feminine, or we simply view certain signs of the zodiac as masculine or feminine in a gendered way. I would like to deconstruct that, because just as society and culture, whenever we have a viewpoints or perspectives that go through a gendered lens, there's always unintentional bias that is taking place, and any kind of bias is going to form as an unintentional blockage to understanding the way that the energy really works. And I do want to plug that right away, because with Leo representing the sun, the symbol being the lion, and all of these things, Leo is traditionally viewed as this masculine sign. And even though it is a projective energy, what we're going to do is turn this mechanical, and it's about the direction and flow of the energy. And you do find that when you are building your axes, so taking us back to the first root of the last axis that we built was Cancer, ruled by the moon, and it's a receptive sign. So that is the energy flowing towards us. That's the minus on the battery. So then when you build your next axis, the first rooted sign, when we get to Leo, is an equal and opposite reaction to the sign and house that came before it. So moving from 4th house and Cancer and receptivity, we're automatically going to move back into projectivity, meaning the plus on the battery, meaning that the energy is moving out and away from you. And then when we take a look at what Leo really rules, you can see why we need to have that projectivity as well. So you start with the house, and what are the rulerships of the house? For the 5th house and for Leo, this is, you can remember it as the house of self-expression. Also vision, like vision of the self. And then when you get to the other end of the axis within Aquarius, you can see how that rulership of the 11th house is really rooted here in the 5th house, because then that becomes the house of like shared vision and shared expression, because it ends up being the house of community and social organization building and things like that. So what I really like to look at when it comes to this axis is this is sort of an axis of resonance, as I call it, because you're finding and discovering your own resonance in the 5th house and with Leo, and you're learning how to express that, and being authentically, genuinely yourself comes from within first, comes from that level of self-understanding. And then that energy in which you express yourself is automatically projected out and away from you. So see how we're getting that projectivity right away in the 5th house and with Leo. When it comes to self-expression, it has to come out of you and for other people to see it. And then when we get to the other end of the axis within Aquarius, and it's automatically receptive, what we are doing is finding our tribe, really, and finding our community, because back in the 5th house and with Leo, we expressed ourselves. And then on the other end of the axis, when we do express ourselves and we are genuinely, authentically ourselves, we then find other people like us, and we find like-minded people, which is what community is and what that phrase find your tribe means. So I just kind of want to point that out and lay that out right away, that that's how we see this plus and minus on the battery and the polarity just on the Leo Aquarius axis, and how these energies are rooted within each other. Because then when the energy comes back back from the Aquarius end into the Leo end, when you find people who are like you and they express like you, and you have found your tribe and you have found community, that also helps you with your self-love. It helps reinforce and validate your authentication of yourself from within through without. And then it's just this cyclical symbiotic relationship of energy that takes place through the polarity on this axis. So this axis is really, really just genuinely important. And understanding it is genuinely important. So let's go back to the foundational rulership of the fifth house. We're starting with self-expression, but I also want to point out that this is quite simply, I call it the spectrum of the self in this house, okay? So the shadow side of that is also being selfish, okay? So the spectrum of the self, on one end of the axis, you can be very, very selfless, right? You're putting other people first, and then you can be engaging in people pleasing and stuff like that. And then on the very, very other end of that frequency spectrum is you being maybe too selfish, and you're only putting yourself first. So we can find that within Leo energy and fifth house energy as well. And that really within the human experience, but especially people who have heavy Leo placements. And what do I mean by heavy placements, right? It's interplanetary placements or the ascendant. So if you have Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, or Mars in Leo, or it's your ascendant on your birth chart, that is heavy Leo energy for you. You are going to spend a lot of time in this fifth house Leo energy, figuring yourself out and being in that spectrum of the self and how you want to express yourself. And also humans are adaptive and we change, right? We go through many, many years throughout our lifetime of self-discovery. So this is also like versions of you that lives here. That is defined here in the fifth house of people can change and that's okay. And you can have like a base rooted understanding of yourself. But then as you move through life, you make more and more discoveries about yourself, and you can begin to express yourself very, very differently than you did, today, 10 years from ago. And then today you're expressing yourself very differently if you look back in time. And then if you were be able to see yourself 10 years from now, perhaps you're expressing yourself very, very differently 10 years from now than you do today. Okay. So that is a big part of the definition of rulerships for the fifth house. Another part of the fifth house and the spectrum of frequency of definition and assignments that we're looking at here is also children and childhood. Okay. And also you can use your house that came before it to remember that, because the fourth house was the house of family. So you're also, when you're looking at the construction of the zodiac wheel and you're going in order from first house, second house, third house, fourth house, fifth house, and you're taking a look at this journey that you're going on through the construction of the zodiac wheel through axis, you cannot arrive at the next house and the things that it rules until you obtain whatever the house before it ruled, okay? That's that equal and opposite reaction is also still contained there. So you have to have a family first in order to then have children. It's like you're building the nuclear family or building the family, and then you graduate. Okay, now you've had your children and you're expanding your family by having children. So you went from that fourth house of home and family and that rulership, and you ended up here in the fifth house. And that's really the next step in life in general. So it's another way that you can easily remember these rulerships is by looking at what came before it as well, not just the polarity. It's also in the definitions, okay? So the fifth house is also the house of the inner child. So when you look at children in childhood and then you look at, okay, that's a spectrum as well. That is a spectrum of frequency of definition. It's broad. It's not just having kids and children and like having it be just like this very tangible thing. It's also conceptual. Also make everything conceptual in your head whenever you're learning all of the astrology and the zodiac wheel and all of these associations. So this is the house of the inner child as well. And then that's how you can graduate to knowing that this is a house that rules pleasure, fun, leisure, and quite frankly, doing things for the sheer sake of wanting to do them, okay? So that's really important, that this is a house of play. It's also a house of romance is found here. And it's also where you get arts, the performing arts, theater, music, live music, things like that. It's the house of the artist. So when we make art as human beings, this is where you hear like, oh, that's not going to be a job. You're not going to make money that way and everything like that, because it's the energy of doing something for the sheer sake of wanting to do it. And human beings make art simply because we want to. We've always been driven, but also in order to even have the time to make art is still associated with leisure. It's associated with downtime. So if you go all the way back in like ancient human history through archaeological discovery. And we have found, cave paintings that are over 30,000 years old at this point in time. And it really disrupts your understanding of the human experience and humanity as a species, because, okay, so we had the time on our hands to, I guess, get bored enough that we wanted to draw permanently on a cave wall, whatever it was. And that meant that our Maslow's hierarchy of needs was met. That meant that we had our shelter, we had our food, we had our water, we had our sleep, we had everything that we needed in order to be alive and continue to survive down here, which I want to point out is back in the second house. So again, do you see how we cannot arrive at any of the definitions and assignments within other particular houses as we are building the zodiac wheel unless we have attained and achieved what is found in the houses that came before it? So humanity couldn't make art until we had everything else that we need, and we were not spending all of our time hunting and gathering and getting water and really just making sure that we didn't die, right? So we had time on our hands, which is a form of leisure, and then we made cave paintings 30,000 years ago. So that cave painting and the act of doing that was found all the way back then, and it's here in the fifth house of Leo. So also I want to go back to childhood play and the inner child and how you can find that here. So it's like children, they do whatever it is that they want to do, like at any given time, right? We all joke as adults of, I wish I'd enjoyed my childhood more. I wish that we spend all of our childhood just wanting to be an adult, and then we spend all of our adulthood just wanting to be a child again. And so it's important to visit the energy of this house. And it's also even like a form of shadow work to interact with your inner child and be asking yourself, even on a daily basis, it's very, very helpful to be asking yourself, what did I do to feel like a kid again today? What did I do to play today? Because as adults, we have bills, we have jobs, we have careers, we have all these burdens and responsibilities. And then that's really the other axis with Capricorn. So that did come before this on the Cancer Capricorn axis, right? So then we're building the next axis, and it's like we can't have fun until we meet all of our responsibilities and do our job and have our burdens and all of those things. That axis did have to come first. And then after that, we get to the axis of fun. And we get to this fifth house of Leo and the axis of playing and play and doing things just for the sheer sake of wanting to do them, okay? So that, I think I covered most of that, on what are the rulerships of the fifth house. And I do want to make sure that I plug, because I didn't do it on necessarily every single episode, that why are we learning the house first? And there's a deep reason for that. When you're learning astrology and you want to know why, the first building block is what is the rulership of just the house. And that's because it doesn't matter what anyone's ascendant is and what other signs of the zodiac end up placing themselves in those houses and ruling those houses. The rulerships and the definitions and assignments behind those houses do not change. So on your personal birth chart, the fifth house is the house of creativity, fun, play, children, childhood, inner child, doing things for the sheer sake of wanting to do it, leisure, downtime, romance, performing arts, creativity, like all these things, right? So if you're looking for clues for yourself and what for you fifth house energy means and represents in your human experience at a personal level, you're going to take a look at the rulership of the other sign of the zodiac that got placed on that house for you. Because unless you have an Aries ascendant, that is the only way to have a Leo ruled fifth house and have all of these rulerships remain the same. So you could have, it would be really fun to have a Pisces ruled fifth house, because Pisces is also another sign of creativity and the dreamer and the artist. And those are the archetypes associated with Pisces too. And so that getting placed on the fifth house can be super duper artistic. If you happen to have that listening to this episode, I can just pull that out as an example. Or a completely stark opposite example would be a Capricorn ruled fifth house. And then that is actually very dissonant and dichotomous, because Capricorn is the sign of rules, responsibility, burdens, lessons, and it's the stiff upper lip authority figure as far as the archetype goes. With that ruling the fifth house could be a very different kind of creativity aspect in your life. And whether you have placements or not, we all have all 12 houses on the zodiac wheel. An empty house simply just means that you might not have energetic focus taking you there in this lifetime. But it also means that if you wanted to take your energetic focus there, you could, because there's also nothing blocking it. So empty houses, empty placements are still important. Okay. Anyway, so that is why we learn the house first. So keep that in mind as we are learning and constructing the entire zodiac wheel by axis and taking a look at polarity and everything like that. After you learn the house, then you stack the planetary rulership on top of it, okay? So here with Leo and the fifth house, I mentioned earlier with my yellow pants that this is ruled by the sun. And it is the only sign of the zodiac that is ruled by the sun. We do have a couple of signs that are ruled by the same planet. For example, Gemini and Virgo are both ruled by Mercury, okay? So it just depends. We have multiple signs of the zodiac ruled by Mars, multiple signs ruled by Venus. And then there are just these other ones, like Cancer is the only one ruled by the moon. And then conversely, you're also seeing that polarity take place next to each other on the zodiac wheel. It's not on the axis. So I do want to point that out, because if people think that lunar energy and solar energy ground each other, that is incorrect. They do not ground each other. They are actually complete polar opposites. By being the fourth house and the fifth house on the zodiac wheel right next to each other, they are this equal and opposite reaction of polarity from each other. They are not held within the same axis. So whenever you are looking at the axis as a whole, that's how you know what energy is actually grounded within itself. Okay. So it's kind of, when you look at what is going to ground both lunar and solar energy, on the other end of the axis is Saturn for both. Okay. And people forget that, because once we get to Aquarius and I talk about the rulerships of Aquarius, there's two rulerships between ancient astrology and modern astrology. So the ancient rulership of Aquarius actually is Saturn. So a lot of people don't know that, and they just know that the modern rulership is Uranus. And so I want to point out that the Capricorn Cancer axis, and you had the rooted energy being in the fourth house with Cancer, on the other side is Capricorn, and Cancer is the moon, right? And on the other side of that axis in polarity is Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, and only Saturn. There is no other rulership between ancient and modern astrology. There was no other additional distinction. It is just Saturn when it comes to Capricorn. So then when we move to the next axis, and it's the sun instead of the moon, which is the polar opposite energy, we're going from receptivity to projectivity, okay? Again, on the other side of the axis, it's actually grounded in Saturn. Okay? So, excuse me, I have a cat that is crying at the door. She really wants to go out, and that is not going to be happening while we are recording. So hopefully you want to come over here and hang out with us. It's my cat Noodle. And I know that is going to be, y'all are going to hear that in this episode. I'm not going to cut it out. So anyway, I want to point out that both lunar and solar energy, despite being polarity, polar opposites, equals and opposite reactions of each other next to each other between the 4th house and the 5th house of the zodiac wheel, both of those energies are actually grounded in Saturn. So that is also important. I just want to plug that. Maybe I'm getting a little bit off the rails. That if you have heavy Leo placements, and you feel ungrounded or your energy is like going into detriment in some way, that you can interact with Saturn energy in order to ground yourself. And like, what does that look like? It's conceptual, it's energetic, it looks however you want it to look. I always say that, there's another version of you, it's your soul, it's your higher self that is existing solely in the energetic state, and that you are the conductor of orchestra of your own energy, and that version of you, your higher self, your soul, whatever you want to call it, simply needs direction and consent that takes place through your consciousness and awareness, which is really important when it comes to talking about the assignments of definition of Leo energy and the rulerships here in the 5th house and Leo, because this is where we find the rulership of ego. Okay. And I want to point out that the love and light spiritual community has done something that I'm going to label extremely dangerous. And they even came up with the word ego death and stuff. Trust me, I get it. I understand what it means. I understand, like, as a concept, it's just like the total and utter destruction of even like who you thought that you were when you go down the spiritual road, and then you find out that, holy crap, like my identity even isn't what I thought it was. That's all well and good and fine. But what they are doing is also, there's this kind of deep-seated belief that spirit does not even have an ego. And I'm going to squash that right here and now. Spirit has an ego. Spirit has an ego. Your soul has an ego. If you interact with other different kinds of entities and whatnot, it's like, depending on how spiritual you are and how much of a channeler you are, I'm sure that there are going to be people who listen to this that are like, oh, I know spirit has an ego. If you work with entities like Archangel Michael, that guy has the biggest ego on the face of this plane of existence and living memory, in my opinion. So let's debunk here and now that the belief that spirit does not have an ego is false. And we need to talk about it right here when it comes to Leo, the 5th house, and the rulership of the sun. Because the planetary rulership of the sun is literally associated with our ego and our core identity. But the sun is also still a spiritual energy. And really, when we believe that spirit does not have an ego and that the spiritual path is the total destruction of ego, and that somehow spiritual people don't have an ego and things like that. I mean, this is when things just really, really go off the rails, and you can see spiritual authority figures be extremely egotistical people, but they're doing this like stuff under the guise of being a vessel of spirit or God or whatever they're doing or talking about, whatever they represent. And they tend to have a deep lack of self-awareness. Okay. And they tend to have a lot of foot and mouth syndrome. They tend to do and say things that they shouldn't do and say. And they tend to become negative examples of spirituality and what that really looks like. And maybe organized religion is more guilty of this, but the general not religious spiritual community is still deeply, deeply, deeply guilty of this. And it is coming from this belief that spirit doesn't have an ego, and that your spiritual journey is to completely eliminate and kill your ego, and then you become only the spiritual version of yourself, and that doesn't even have an ego. And it's like kind of this, it's like absolving you of all of your problems and sins. And then there starts to be a lack of shadow work. And it's really found all right here. It's all found right here with this planetary rulership of the sun and this like belief of this illumination of light and spirit and being like light beings and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that we're not, but spirit has an ego, okay? And the actual integration of the spiritual ego and the human ego is how you develop a higher level of self-understanding and a higher level of self-awareness And when you have that blockage, that's even when people are going, if it gets really, really severe, it develops into things like spiritual psychosis. Okay. And then that's when the spiritual community gets a really bad reputation. And we're just seen as the absolute crazy of the crazies. Just, insanity. And it's just like, then that person has a God complex and blah, 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 blah. That's all found here, okay? I'm going to get on my soapbox for a few minutes about that and say it's found right here with this planetary rulership of the sun and what the sun represents. And that's also why both the sun and the moon are grounded within the polarity of Saturn. Because Saturn, if you go back to my Capricorn episode, if you haven't listened to it yet, I describe Saturn as the engineer. And so I will be doing that again once we start talking about the other end of this axis with Leo and Aquarius. And that in order to really move with precision within what we discover here in the fifth house with Leo, with our identity of the spectrum of the self, and being able to express ourselves in our core identity and our ego, both egos, our human and spiritual egos of our identity, we have to then be grounded within discipline. With discipline also comes discernment. It also brings us responsibility, taking on the burden of responsibility of ourself and our identity and what that means with how we express ourselves and what we do with it. Because then we can also hurt other people around us, depending on how far we go. And so then that's why Saturn as a planet and as an energetic rulership also rules boundaries. And it's like, are you crossing boundaries with yourself? Are you crossing boundaries with others that you should not be crossing? So the moon is the inner world, and then the sun is more of the outer world, the outer self-expression. So that's why the moon is coming first, is you're doing that internal self-discovery first. And it's that inner world, that emotions and stuff like that. And then we graduate, and the equal and opposite reaction is what got discovered there, and then how that projects out from us and what that looks like. And that's what we're getting here in the rulership of the sun, okay? So this is also in the rulership of the sun where you get that the fifth house and Leo, so the sign of the zodiac and the house, this is also a house of leadership, strength. If you do tarot and you know tarot cards, the strength card is this card associated with Leo. And there's even a lion in the Rider-Waite art, like the original art of tarot, okay? So once we get to the symbol and we're talking about how the symbol of Leo is the lion, we're going to see how all this is associated again, right? So this it's the house of self-expression, and all of these things are tied together through when you're stacking your foundational leadership. It's the house of you, okay? And so it's like you can't be confident, right? It's like you can't exist in your personal strengths that then results in self-confidence, that then results in you becoming a strong leader, whether that's to and for others or even just yourself. Because it's like, if we bring this home and we bring this back about ourselves, be the leader of your own life, This is also where you get like main character energy, is very prevalent. Like that phrase is very prevalent for like fifth house and Leo and the sun and all these like assignments and definitions of everything that we see here. And then the sun, that planetary rulership also gets you the spotlight, and that people with Leo placements, it tends to be very easy for them to get attention and things like that. But also when you look at the house rulerships and you see, oh, this is the house of creativity and self-expression, and you get performing arts and theater and live music and all of these things, that is somebody who is getting attention, and they have a spotlight on them in a very literal way. So then you also can look at the exploration of the world as a stage. And we have all come to maybe play a role, and that's what the human experience even is. You can get that out of the planetary rulership of the sun, of when the spotlight is on you and the intention is on you, what do people see? What do people get out of you? What role did you come down here to play in the human experience? And then that role, whatever it is, whatever discovery you make, whatever choice you make, then you get to the other end of the axis within Aquarius, and that role that you came to play is then how you find your people, right? Okay, so just to take it back to the axis and the polarity. Okay, so we are building our foundation. We are taking in our understanding of the entire zodiac wheel through axis. I'm flip-flopping back and forth even to the axis that came before it a lot, because there's a lot of the understanding of this axis that even comes from that axis, and the equal and opposite reaction from that axis, and it has to come first, and why it has to come first, and that we are building a story. We are building the human experience. We are using this as a tool. We're using the zodiac wheel as a tool to even understand the human experience at a deeper level, to also then navigate the human experience in a more fulfilling way, an easier way that makes more sense, removes blockages, things like that, right? So we started with just the house, fifth house. What is the fifth house rule? Here is our yeller. She has finally shown up. Hi, Noodle. I will admit, it's a very nice day outside, and it's warm. And for those that don't know, I live in Denver, and Denver cannot pick a lane when it comes to the weather. And it was literally just snowing less than a week ago, and now it's 80. So as far as my cats are concerned, yes, they beg to be outside when it's nice. And now she's already left. So back to our foundational building blocks. Fifth house, the house of fun, the house of pleasure, the house of self-expression and self-vision, and how you see yourself and the way that you want the world to see you, because the world is a stage, right? So that also takes us to this being the house of creativity. The house of gestures as well comes from self-expression, which is where you get romance with all of this, but also it's the house of play. So that takes us to childhood, children, and the inner child, right? So that's our first building block. And then what did we put on top of that? We put the sun, we put the planetary rulership on top of that, and then we get the spotlight, confidence, leadership. You cannot attain any of those things without the self-understanding. You cannot become a leader without being able to express yourself freely and have people receive you as you are, and confidence and strength and your genuine, authentic self. But we also associate the sun with what? We associate the sun with identity, our core identity, but the identity that people see from us, that they get from us, because remember, this is a spotlight, and you and the world is a stage in this house, right? Whereas the one that came before it was the moon, and that was the hidden inner world, what people don't immediately get from you. But you also have to get there first, and you have to discover that first in order for the sun to arrive and shine a spotlight on you and see like what people are gonna get from you while you're in the spotlight, right? So this is also associated with ego and the full spectrum of the self, and that we are deconstructing from the dangerous spiritual love and light community and spiritual bypassing, because bypassing the spiritual ego and the integration of the spiritual ego is a form of spiritual bypassing. I want to point that out. So we have the human ego is in the spectrum of the self with the human identity, but we also have our spiritual identity, our spiritual self, our higher self, our soul, and that there's an ego there too. And that when we work with the sun, when we work with Leo, when we work in fifth house energy, we can also work on the integration and our understanding of our human ego and our human identity in conjunction with our spiritual ego and our spiritual identity and our soul and our higher self. And that putting those things together and integrating them and co-creating with them and all of those things also gives us a higher level of self-awareness and self-understanding, and helps us move not just with ourselves, but also with others better. And then we are going to stack the element on top of the planetary building block. The sun makes it very easy to remember, because what is the sun but a gigantic ball of fire in the sky? So therefore, Leo and fifth house energy is ruled by the element of fire. Okay? Very, very easy to remember, but you can also remember this by axis. It helps you remember the whole axis, because every axis is either a fire and air axis, or every axis is either an earth and water axis, because those two elements are always grounded within polarity within each other. So you can also remember that in life, that whenever you feel like anything associated with your element of fire goes out, meaning you are experiencing burnout, which in late stage capitalism is very, very common for the vast majority of us. So when we are experiencing burnout, what do? We go interact on the other end of the axis within the element of air in some way, okay? So Leo, in a lot of ways, rules, it's like Aries is the first inner flame that we look at, the spark of life, you know, but Leo is then like the graduation. And the fifth house is the graduation of that spark of life. And you also see how fire is then associated so deeply with our identity and our self, because Aries, the first house, is the first house of identity. So let's go back there and associate that with that rulership, and then see how here we end up in Leo in the fifth house, and it's the house of self-expression and the vision of the self. Well, we needed to discover our identity back in the first fire house with Aries first, and that gave us our spark of life, our inner flame, figured out our purpose in that. And then once we figured that part out, once we attain that, so I'm bringing that up again, see how we cannot arrive at the fifth house and the things that we are going to do with the fifth house energy, even from an elemental standpoint. We cannot arrive here until we went to the other houses that came before it, okay? So that's how we arrive at this version of the element of fire being not just our expression, our self-expression, and how we project our energy out and away from us. Because remember, this is not receptive fire the way Sagittarius is. Sagittarius is receptive fire. It's taking in information and energy and figuring out what to do with it. This is projective fire again. So Aries and Leo are both projective fire houses, versus Sagittarius, the third fire sign, is a receptive house. So that's another reason that I'm breaking down the gendered stereotypes, that if you're going to view masculine energy as solely projective, well, we have Daddy Sagittarius that is viewed definitely as a masculine sign by traditional astrologers, is actually a receptive sign. So I just want to point that out, that this is why we are building by axis through polarity, equal and opposite reaction the entire way through, the plus and the minus on the battery. It also changes the performance of the element. It is mechanical, okay? So we're really just building a system through the human experience and how we experience it. So yeah, our creativity, if we don't have our inner flame stoked, right? We're not even going to be creative. We're not even going to want to express ourselves. We're not going to be inspired and therefore driven to engage in that projective fire element within Leo to do whatever we want to do for the sheer sake of wanting to do it, because maybe we feel burnt out. So if we do feel burnt out, and we always know that any fire axis, or the one side of the fire axis, is rooted in air on the other end of the axis, we have to go interact with air element energy in some way, which is intellectual. It lives up in the mind. So it's like on the other end of this axis, with Aquarius being an air sign, it's another one of the like intellectual smarty pants signs, okay? So interacting in the mind, you go there because that's how you even figure out like how and why and what needs to happen in regards to your burnout, okay? You have to get a little bit logical and rational with it. You have to get analytical with it. You have to take a look at your life and your choices and what is going on with you, what is going on externally and internally in order to pick it apart and then be like, oh, okay, no wonder I'm burnt out. I have not been doing XYZ. Like, you have to get analytical in order to figure it out. And also it's the element of like associated with making decisions. Because remember, Libra is ruled by air, and that's the sign of the zodiac that rules decisions at all and negotiations and compromise and whatnot. And it's the scales and weighing things in order to figure out how to make a decision. That's air right away. See? So see, as we build the zodiac wheel, how we're just really connecting other dots, even through other axes. And we're learning how to navigate the human experience in a better way because we all deal with burnout. But we all also probably want to be creative, and we're probably frustrated living in the current version of the human experience that we're all kind of living in which we have also really diminished this house, and we've diminished this energy, and we have taken fifth house and Leo energy and this house of fun, leisure, pleasure, doing things for the sheer sake of wanting to do them, creativity, all of these things. And we've said that, what are you going to do in your life? To like, that's not going to make you money. That's not going to do this. That's not going to do that. So we've also, as a society and culture, really put fifth house and Leo energy into detriment. And so it would all do us a lot of good in order to interact with this energy in some way. Ask ourselves what we did today that made us feel like a kid. Ask ourselves what we did to play today. What did we do today for the sheer sake of wanting to do it? How did I express myself today? As a culture and as a society, that is a form of healing for the version of the human experience that we are all currently living in and dealing with. And that's a huge, important piece of even understanding this house and the rulerships and everything that it governs and applies to, including the element, that element of fire, and not feeling burnt out and wanting to be creative and be passionate and express ourselves for the sheer sake of wanting to do it, not because we're going to make money off of it. And this capitalistic experience that it's like, oh, everything that you do, you need to make money, make money, make money, make money. That's not in this house. That's not in this energy. It's not attached to it. It's not even on the other side of the axis. I'm getting really preachy today in this episode, but here we are. So after we learn the element, you're going to stack the mode on top of it, okay? And the reason that I'm going to have you learn the mode this way is it will help you learn that it is the entire axis is the same mode. Because when you learn that there's only 3 modes in astrology, it's cardinal first, always fixed is next, and then mutable comes after that. There's 12 signs. So by math, there's 4, there's 4 signs of the zodiac per mode. And that is another thing that I find just people get overwhelmed. And it's like, oh, astrology is this vast system of knowledge. And I'm not saying that it's not, but when you have this foundational knowledge of the construction of the zodiac wheel, and you know that the entire axis is the same mode, it simply simplifies it. You do not have a bunch to memorize. You are not memorizing 12 signs separately. So the mode of this axis is fixed, okay? And we also can know that by, once again, going back to the axis that came before it, because the axis that came before it is a cardinal axis. The Cancer Capricorn axis is a cardinal axis. It is the start of a new season. It's the winter and summer solstices. Flip that in order. It's the Cancer is the summer solstice and Capricorn is the winter solstice. My bad. And then also going back to our very first axis of Aries and Libra, that was the spring equinox and the fall equinox. So those are the starts of the season. And the modes always go in this order because we are still learning the entire zodiac wheel is constructed with the laws of physics applied. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. All of the energy that comes before it all of the energy that comes after is reacting to the energy that came before it. There you go. So cardinal always comes first because that's how we started the entire zodiac wheel. And then we got to our second cardinal axis. We completed, there's only 4 seasons, right? So it's like we completed that. So now the equal and opposite reaction to cardinal energy is always fixed energy. And you can see that through the way that cardinal energy works and the way that fixed energy works, because cardinal energy being the start of every new season, you simply define it as starter energy. That is the easiest way to remember what is cardinal energy. It is starter energy. People who contain cardinal energy, heavy cardinal placements, they're usually good at starting new things, starting new projects, things like that. They're very, very motivated. They never want to be held back in life. They're always doing something. They're always doing something new. So then fixed energy is the equal and opposite reaction to that. Is what is the answer to forward movement, go do something new energy? The answer to that energy is the stoppage of motion. So that is how you can remember what is fixed energy. Fixed energy is always the stoppage of motion. How does that manifest itself? What does it look like? Well, it can be stubborn. It cannot want to change. It can be very controlling and things like that. But if you take the personification out of it and turn it mechanical, we go from like a lot of forward motion to no motion at all. And then always the answer to fixed energy, the equal and opposite to that, is mutable energy. And because it's just reacting to both of the energies that came before it, what is the equal and opposite reaction to those two energies of the forward motion and the stopping of motion is go with the flow. I can be whatever kind of energy you need me to be. I can move in whatever direction you need me to be. And it's based more on the context of the surrounding energy, and it's very, very adaptable. So cardinal energy is starter energy. Fixed energy is stoppage of motion energy, and mutable energy is go with the flow energy. And it's all just an equal and opposite reaction to itself. And that helps you remember what it is. Okay. So the Leo Aquarius axis as a whole being a fixed energy, that is where you can, with people with traits of heavy Leo energy, they do tend to be a little bit stubborn and maybe a little bit controlling and stuff like that. But that's also where their confidence can come from, because when you are set in your ways, that also comes from the confidence of knowing that that's the way that your way is. Okay, so because this is the spectrum of the self ruled by the sun, the ego, the human ego, the spiritual ego's core identity, but the spotlight on us, the role that we have come to play in this world, when this world is a stage, you need to be secure in that. And in order to be secure in that, it's not going to be mutable. It's not going to be go with the flow. It's not going to be adaptable. It's not going to be like I'm a chameleon and I'm changing whatever my energy needs to be at any given time, So that's, take that right out of it. You know it's not a mutable axis just because of that. But also, it's not necessarily going to be cardinal either, because that's a lot of travel. Like when it comes to the energy, it's a lot of travel. And the travel includes observation of new energy coming into the mix and a revolving door of energy that then gets observed whenever there is cardinal energy. And then that energy can change very quickly with cardinal energy, because when they take in new additional information for whatever it is they're doing or whatever it is they're working on, or this new project that they've started, well, then the whole project changes and the project management changes. And it's like, oh, I found this out and I didn't know it before. And it took cardinal energy to go travel and move forward in order to find that. So that's really how you can see how the fixed nature of the energy of this axis really, really performs. It's rooted in order to reach that level of self-understanding at the highest level, because this is the full spectrum of the self. And if we're getting super utopian with it, and it's like, oh, I am genuinely and authentically myself, expressing myself exactly as I want to, just because I want to at all times, and I'm also being accepted for it, which exists on the other end of the axis with Aquarius, community building, find your tribe, find your resonant, find your like-minded people, right? You have to stop. Okay. Like you have to have that stoppage of motion of the energy in order to reach that level of attainment of self-discovery that becomes so genuine, so authentic, has released all blockages of fear, anxiety, of not being received. Because it's on the other end of the axis, that is the reception. This is the projective side. This is the plus on the battery. So that's why on the other end of the axis, that has to turn into reception when it comes to resonance, because it does beg the question of how is your self-expression being received by others in order to find your tribe and find your community. Okay, so those are our building blocks that we're building one by one. We started with the house, right? House, fifth house. What's the fifth house? Oh, it's the house of fun, play, pleasure, doing things for the sheer sake of wanting to do it. The house of self-expression, which is the full spectrum of the self. When we said play, it also took us to children, childhood, inner child. Okay, that's all fifth house energy. Then we put the planetary rulership on top of that. What is the planetary rulership of Leo and the fifth house? It's the sun. Okay, well, what does that represent? Well, it's the spotlight that gets shown on us when we get attention. How do we get attention? We get attention through also expressing ourselves. So it took us back to that house rulership, but it's also associated with your core identity and also associated with ego as an archetype with the sun. But in tarot, we remember it is the strength card as well. So then through the sun rulership, we also get that this is a rulership of leadership, confidence, and then we're taken right back to self-expression. So we're seeing how everything is attached. But then we see that planetary rulership of the sun takes us right to the element rulership of the sun is just a big fat ball of fire in the sky. And this is a fire element house and sign of the zodiac. And how is that related to the rulerships? Well, takes us right back to this being the house of creativity, because you cannot express yourself without passion when you're doing a creative project. Obviously, you're not going to do or start any kind of creative project unless you are passionate about it, and there's got to be fire involved, and that fire is always associated with passion and purpose and doing and taking action and everything like that. And then we take our mode and we see what our mode is, which is the entire actual axis, not just the sign. So both Leo and Aquarius also are ruled by the fixed mode. So this is fixed mode because that's how you make your self-discovery and be confident in that and in your expression, your self-expression, and then say that you forgot all of that. What are we stacking on top of that? It is going to be the symbol, which I've kind of already talked about. It's the lion. It's the strength card. It's like I'm starting to run out of time on this episode because I could talk about Leo for days. The symbol on Leo is super easy. Like there's a lot of people that have lion tattoos and you can literally walk up to them and be like, let me guess, you're a Leo. Or they have some kind of heavy Leo placement if they're super into astrology, but it's typically Leo suns. So we associate the lion with strength. We associate it with confidence. We associate it with, being genuinely, authentically yourself. You're the lion, right? So if you forget everything about these signs of the zodiac, then you just are like, what is the symbol? And the imagery that the symbol evokes, you can take a look at that symbol and it will literally take you back to everything else that was the building block, okay? So I think I went over, the last thing that I really want to plug ever is like the mainstream pop astrology stereotypes of like putting these types of energy in a box, and they really view things as like strength versus weaknesses, and really understanding the duality of every sign actually includes that whatever you view as a weakness, you can turn that information over and flip it on its head. You can seek and find additional information that will turn it into a strength, and whatever you view as a strength, you can seek and find additional information that will turn it into a weakness. So Leo energy, people tend to say they can get accused of being selfish, and I already pointed out that that exists as this being this rulership of the spectrum of the self, and also ego being involved. People accuse Leo people of having big egos and stuff like that. I'm not saying that that's not true, but what I am saying is that that is simply found in the rulership. So those people are going to be living in that energy automatically by having heavy Leo placements, but also they're teachers. Everybody is a teacher. All energy is a tool. All energy is is a gift. Some people are simply teaching negatively and some people are teaching positively, but that people with Leo energy, they're going to be walking a tightrope in life of feeling like they're too selfless and then going to the other end of that frequency spectrum of the self and then becoming too selfish. And they might spend their entire lives trying to find that middle ground. And that it's not really a weakness, it's just a form of exploration and self-expression, right? So that is kind of what I wanted to plug at like the very end of just make sure you are really understanding the duality of all of these signs and rulerships and what everything represents. Nothing is inherently positive or negative. Nothing is inherently a strength or a weakness. Everything actually just is, okay? That will help you understand the energy better, reduce it down to being mechanical and everything like that. I think that's pretty much it. Okay, so if you guys want to connect with me on any of my social media platforms, but I am definitely the most active on Facebook and Threads because I identify as a writer. It's Brie Rhiannon on all platforms, and that's also my website, is BrieRhiannon.com. So it's B-R-I-E, like the cheese, and Rhiannon, like the Fleetwood Mac song, R-H-I-A-N-N-O-N. I also have a Facebook group, so if you are seeking community, such as on the other end of the axis, and we'll talk a lot more about this when we get to the Aquarius episode. But if you are seeking like-minded people and community building, then you can find my group. You can put it in the search bar. It's the title of my first book, which is a work in progress and not published yet. It's called Lunar Revolution. And that is my book on all of my science-based methods of manifesting with the moon, with astrology applied and the 12 signs of the zodiac, and understanding how the moon rains down different frequencies when it goes through each sign, and how you can live within lunar synchronicity for your reality generation and manifestation purposes so that you can generate the best possible and most fulfilling human experience for yourself. If you want to book with me, you can book on my website. I do a lot more than astrology, you guys. I am a degular psychic medium, meaning if you have a loved one who has passed on and you want to communicate with them, I do that too. I do pet readings. I do energy work. I have just energy work typed up as an offering, a service as well. I also have digital products. So with this being the episode of self-expression and you have to go through self-discovery, I have a soul work workbook that helps you figure out what your soul purpose, gifts, and lessons are. And then my second workbook that builds upon that workbook is how to decode your personal frequency signature, which is really just the energy of your soul and your higher self, and learning how to read that. And then that also helps you read exterior energy better, because guess what? I'm not the only psychic. Neither is Teresa Caputo or Tyler Henry. Everyone is psychic. All human beings have psychic energy, psychic abilities. The universe is 97% dark matter. It's intangible AF. So of course that we are built in with these intangible psychic senses so that we can navigate what is largely in an intangible world. And then because this is the house of childhood, children, and inner child, I do have a inner adolescence shadow work guide that takes you back to focusing on the trauma years, as I call them, ages 12 through 19, when your hormones hit. And it's really inner child work. And I found that from my personal experience that I did with therapists, if you're taking me back to my early childhood, maybe I struggle to remember those memories, and I don't remember when it is the first time that my parents ever didn't listen to me and how that made me feel rejected. But I do remember when I felt rejected in middle school. So it is a bunch of exercises exploring embarrassment, exploring instability, exploring how you feel about your physical body, exploring instability. I said instability. Anyway, check out these things. They're on my website, and you can book with me one-on-one. We can have a session. I also offer full year packages. I'm a great practitioner to work with an entire year, where we're meeting twice a month, doing energy work in between and everything like that, because I can teach you how to get in touch with your psychic abilities. It's psychic development, teach you how to use astrology in your everyday life. You go through full lunar cycle with me, a full zodiac calendar year, and how you are navigating your human experience and just whatever happens, happens with me in that year. And I like for people to graduate and not need me anymore. If you want to still work with me, I'm not going to say no. But my goal is for human beings to have as many tools as possible to navigate the human experience in a better, more fulfilling way. It does not have to be so awful and so hard, I swear. And we all just need to work together in order to get this in a better place. I got on my soapbox a lot in this episode. I think that's about it. And definitely check out the other episodes in this series. Like and subscribe, whatever platform you're listening on, because I will have other podcast projects in the future. This is just my first one. And if I get to work with you one-on-one, I'm so excited to meet you in advance. If all we ever do is connect on socials, it is wonderful to connect with you. I hope that you guys have found this helpful, and I will see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye.